You're just trying to taint us with him. So that, clearly there was a school of thought that we had to absolutely end slavery no matter which way we did it. Yes?
Was your position at the time politically motivated to become president? Is that why you said to preserve what there was of it in hopes of getting enough votes in the South? And then
when I put the Cooper Union Address together, yes, the primary purpose of the Cooper Union Address was to propel myself into the presidential race. There are many people who have studied Lincoln and written about it. Harold Holzer, who is just a preeminent scholar in regards to Lincoln, has written a whole book about the Cooper Union Address, preparing for it and what happened afterwards. But there's a tremendous school of thought that was pivotal. Without that speech being a wild success, I would have never had a shot at beating the Easterners at the presidential bid for the Republican candidacy. So I knew that's what I was going into it, but that is also very consistent with what I've been arguing all through the debates. I truly did not come to the conclusion that we were going to end slavery until the presidential years. When I saw the war, saw what was going on, being pressured by people, what's his name? Black gentleman, very prominent in the North, abolitionist. Frederick Douglass, thank you, yes. He was pressuring me to do something far beyond what I was doing. There was tremendous pressures on it. And you remember, I think we've talked about this, the Emancipation Proclamation. Someone was talking about it before we talked today. The Emancipation Proclamation is a unique document. Everyone points out that this is, look what Lincoln did to end slavery. And if you actually go back and look at the Emancipation Proclamation, it comes with some extraordinary conditions. The Emancipation Proclamation I would not sign until we had had some kind of victory, because I wasn't going to try to promote this as a concept while we were continuing to lose the war. We were always losing battles. But so I had the Emancipation Proclamation drafted. I was waiting for the opportunity. The opportunity presented itself. I signed the Emancipation Proclamation, and it frees slaves in any state actively in rebellion with the United States. On that day, if you were in a state that was actively in rebellion with the United States, you theoretically were free. Of course, if you were in a state that was actively rebelling against us, they didn't see it that way, and you weren't free at all. And if you were in a state like Kentucky, which was not actively rebelling and had slavery, you were still a slave. I only freed the slaves in the states that were rebelling. And I had no power to enforce that until the Army got there. And that's what we did. When the Army seized land that was in those states, then the slaves would be freed in those areas. But on the day, it's widely misunderstood, the day that I freed slaves, I actually freed nobody. I just set everything in place that would result in the freedom. And then I would come to a point in that war, I would come to a point where I said, I've always thought slavery was wrong, now it's time to end it. And I would take steps to start ending slavery, as opposed to saying, let's just perpetuate it where it's at and not allow it to expand. But back when I was arguing that, the Cooper Union, writing the address, the position I had officially was, slavery's wrong, we will not allow it to expand, but it can exist where it is. Yes, sir.
I recently read an article dealing with your political career earlier, and it seemed like you got betrayed by a number of, they were maybe temporary friends, but you didn't hold that against them. What sort of was your philosophy toward
Okay, well, let's look at it. It's politics, so temporary friends betray you. It's politics, all right? It happens that way. My position would have been, if you look at my life, it's really relatively simple. There was no reason to hold a grudge. There was no reason to just perpetuate what had been wrong about a relationship. And that's why when I actually get to the White House, I can bring people in that actively oppose me as president, because I knew that they were great thinkers and that I needed that kind of counsel in the cabinet. You know, and there's different things would work against me in my campaigns. For instance, we had the Black Hawk War one year. In the middle of my campaign, I was in the military. And the guys that were in the military elected me to be the commander of our particular outfit. And I can remember doing drilling and working in a field, and I can remember marching them across the field and coming to a fence where there was a gate. And I couldn't remember the command to get them out of the way they were marching into a column so they would go through the gate. So I said, halt. And I said, we're going to take a break for 5 minutes, then we're going to meet on the other side of that fence. All right? But if you go back, I also tell you that as a soldier, I actively fought many battles against mosquitoes, many bloody battles against mosquitoes. But I never saw any action. The drawback to it was I was away in the military. And so when I came back, I only had a few weeks to stump to try to beat the candidate that had been campaigning the whole time I was gone. And so I was not successful in that campaign. But the wonderful thing about my life is if you really are going to look at something and you say, well, what can I learn from your life? I had all kinds of failure all through my life, whether it was business failure, campaign failure, my personal debt failure. I've had failures. And I came up and got out of them, which is what most Americans were doing at that time. They would get setbacks and they would overcome them and they moved down the line. It's a great example of just put it behind you and move on. And I think that that's really the answer as to why I wouldn't hold a grudge and I try to get a payback in any of those folks. Now, you know, I might do things immediately during the Lincoln-Douglas debates. Douglas pointed out that I once owned a general store that sold liquor. Now, you know, there was a large part of the population, probably still is, that didn't think drinking was a good thing. So he was trying to taint me. And so when I had my turn to answer back, if you go back and you read the debates, I addressed that. I said, yes, in fact, I owned a store that sold alcohol, but I didn't drink it. But my best customer was Douglas. He was on the other side of it. And in fact, that's where he and I met, because we would gather in that general store with other people from that area, and we would just chit-chat and talk about the politics. I guess some of you guys may be old enough to remember, or at least learn, it's basically Cracker Barrel. You gather around the Cracker Barrel, gather around the potbelly stove. That's what you did to socialize and talk. And that's what we did with in New Salem with all of us, and Douglas was there. So yeah, you use those things. Douglas also was one of them that accused me of being two-faced. And I was always uncomfortable with the fact that I was not good looking. I mean, if you see the photographs of me, I'm not good looking. All right? So I stood in front of the people and in all sincerity said, if I had two faces, would I wear this one? So his wit was just wonderful that way, and he was always into self-deprecating. Here's a couple of others. He comes into town one day and he's telling a story about how he's walking into town and here comes a wagon. And he waves the wagon down and he says, I'm sorry, sir, but it's really hot. And he takes his coat off. He says, or he holds his coat up. He doesn't take it off. He says, would you mind very much carrying my coat into town? And the farmer in the wagon says, well, no, I wouldn't mind. I'll take it into town. And how are you going to get it back? And I looked at him and I said, I intend on remaining in it. So he laughed and gave me a ride. And there's another occasion where we're talking about what my looks are and such. And I tell children this one all the time, you know, that I grew up fast. I was tall, skinny, gawky, long arms, long legs. I was awkward, and I was uncomfortable about it. What kid isn't? And when those periods where you get those great growth spurts. I was uncomfortable about it, and I stayed uncomfortable about it all my life, knowing that I wasn't a good-looking man. But I used to tell this one, there was a time when I walked into town, never been to the town before, never saw the man before, and he walked up and he gave me this pocket knife. And he says, "Sir, I have something for you," and he gave me the pocket knife. And I looked at him and I said, "How is it, sir? We've never met each other. I've never been to this town. How is it that you believe that that pocket knife belongs to me?" And he says, "Well, the man who gave it to me said if I ever met someone uglier than me, I should give it to him." And I could have taken that a lot of ways. I laughed, and I carried the knife the rest of my life with me, told that story. Anything else? It's been delightful. Thank you.